Rising from the Ashes, Recovering India's Civilizational Narrative. Written by Rakesh Krishnan Simha. After centuries of foreign rule and cultural decline, India is witnessing a revival of its heritage, driven by Hindu traditions, cultural pride, and nationalism. With mythological films and sacred site restorations, India is reclaiming its rich legacy on the global stage. India is one of the world's oldest and most diverse civilizations, spanning thousands of years. With over 2,000 distinct languages, a multitude of religions, and a long tradition of artistic, philosophical, and scientific inquiry, India's cultural landscape has been shaped by a complex web of influences from within and beyond its borders. What is unique about the country is that, unlike other ancient civilizations, whose legacies are now only preserved in monuments and museums, India's living heritage is deeply embedded in everyday life, manifested through temples, festivals, customs, and sacred pilgrimage sites. Yet in the last millennium, India's culture, particularly its Hindu traditions, has been subjected to significant disruptions. The Islamic conquest followed by British colonial rule profoundly altered the country's cultural and religious trajectory, leading many to believe that India has been experiencing cultural and religious erosion. Author V.S. Naipaul rightly described India as a wounded civilization. However, like the phoenix, India is rising again, experiencing a cultural renaissance with an irresistible momentum. This is remarkable because at the turn of the last century, the initiatives of influential leaders such as Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Aurobindo Ghosh, Rabindranath Tagore, and Swami Vivekananda to revive and promote India's rich civilizational heritage post-independence was nixed by Marxist and secular ideologies whose primary agenda was to diminish the achievements of ancient India. The past few decades have witnessed a resurgence of Hindu identity and Indian culture, seen in everything from the rise of nationalist sentiment to the success of movies like Bahubali, a symbol of the public's rekindled interest in their ancient history. Currently, India is on the cusp of a cultural renaissance, poised to emerge from its colonial past into a new era in which its culture, history, and traditions can once again take center stage. Suppression of India's cultural identity. To understand the current cultural revival, it's essential to reflect on the historical forces that shaped modern India. The last 1,000 years of Indian history have been marked by foreign invasions, colonization, and suppression of indigenous traditions. The arrival of Islam in India in the early medieval period heralded the establishment of several Muslim empires, most notably the Delhi Sultanate, followed by the Mughal Empire. These empires led to the systematic suppression of Hindu customs, temples, and religious practices. The destruction of temples, the forced conversions, and the imposition of Islamic laws during certain periods contributed to what many historians describe as cultural genocide, especially the marginalization of the indigenous Hindu way of life. The Muslim invasions also brought Persian culture and language to India, which became entrenched during the Mughal period. Persian and later Urdu became the dominant languages of administration and culture, replacing Sanskrit as the base of India's lingua franca. The European colonial period, mid-18th century to 1947, under the British Empire further exacerbated this process. The British not only exploited India economically, but also systematically undermined its cultural heritage. British education policies, for example, favored Western learning, often at the expense of traditional Indian knowledge systems. Thousands of local schools were closed down, and English became the primary instruction medium, further distorting India's linguistic landscape. Western values of secularism, rationalism, and individualism were promoted as superior to the deeply spiritual and community-oriented Indian ethos. The British even went so far as to present India's pre-colonial history as backward and unprogressive, often portraying Indian society as stagnant and in need of reform. The dual assault on India's religion and culture, first by the Muslim empires and later by the European Christians, created a long-lasting impact on Indian identity. For centuries, India's indigenous culture, which was deeply rooted in its Hindu traditions, was suppressed or marginalized. Even as the country gained independence in 1947, the aftershocks of this cultural suppression persisted. Secularism, which became the cornerstone of India's post-independence identity, often found itself at odds with the Hindu culture that had been the country's foundation for millennia. Rise of a Hindu-centric India. However, in the last few decades, there has been a noticeable shift in India's political and cultural climate. The cultural renaissance is most starkly visible in the Indian film industry. The success of movies like Bahubali, 2015, and RRR, 2022, directly reflects the growing public interest in India's ancient history, mythology, and warrior culture. Bahubali, a film set in the fictional kingdom of Mahishmati, raked in over 1,200 rupees crore globally, a feat few Indian films have achieved. This film, which draws heavily from Hindu mythology, epics like the Mahabharata, Sanskrit poetry, and India's rich historical traditions, captured the imagination of millions across the globe. Its success is not just a cinematic triumph. It is indicative of the resurgence of a collective desire to reconnect with India's glorious past. The emergence of more Hindu symbols and references in popular media and politics has ignited a cultural reawakening among India's masses. The fascination with Hindu mythology, epics, and history is no longer confined to intellectual circles or temples. It has become mainstream. This resurgence, in part, reflects a broader sense of nationalism, wherein the people of India seek to assert their identity after centuries of external influence and suppression. Role of Indian institutions in cultural revival. If India is to fully embrace this cultural renaissance, the role of its institutions, particularly in education and the arts, cannot be overstated. For centuries, Europe thrived after the consolidation of nation-states in the 18th century, a period when independent universities, centers of cultural patronage, and artisan guilds nurtured scholarship, creativity, and technological progress. Consequently, this period witnessed remarkable achievements in music, scholarship, jurisprudence, art, architecture, and technological advancements. Notable examples include Goethe's literary works, Gutenberg's printing press, and the extensive works of composers like Bach and Mozart. India must follow a similar path to ensure that its culture, history, and knowledge systems flourish once more. A key area where this can be accomplished is in the realm of education. India's educational system, for a long time, has been heavily influenced by Western models. While Western education has brought benefits in terms of technical knowledge and governance, it has often failed to provide a solid grounding in India's own rich heritage. Schools, universities, and institutions must integrate Indian history, philosophy, and the arts into their curricula to cultivate a new generation knowledgeable in global affairs and deeply rooted in the country's traditions. Before the British dismantled India's flourishing guilds, these guilds served as the primary patrons of local schools and colleges, playing a crucial role in supporting and sustaining the arts and education. In the absence of the traditional guilds, private businesses and corporate houses must now assume this vital role, actively funding and promoting cultural initiatives. India has a booming corporate sector that is fast becoming one of the largest in the world, and it is time that these businesses recognize their responsibility to contribute to the country's cultural growth. Corporate social responsibility, CSR, should not be limited to environmental conservation or poverty alleviation, but should also extend to cultivating India's intellectual and cultural assets. Business houses should sponsor music and dance academies, invest in theaters, libraries, and museums, and encourage sports and physical fitness through local gyms and sports facilities. By making these cultural and educational activities more accessible, India can begin to foster a generation that is more connected to its roots and proud of its heritage. The growth of regional arts, traditional crafts, and classical music should be nurtured through public-private partnerships, ensuring India's diverse cultural expressions find a platform for growth and international recognition. Making an impact. In recent years, new initiatives have resulted in a significant revival of Indic culture in India, manifesting in various initiatives aimed at restoring heritage, promoting religious tourism, and fostering a renewed sense of national identity. This revival is often framed within a broader narrative of cultural renaissance that seeks to reconnect contemporary India with its ancient traditions. These include restoration of temples and cultural sites. During the medieval era, Indian culture experienced a revival spearheaded by Adi Shankaracharya, who established the Char Dhams, Badrinath, Rameshwaram, Dwarka, and Puri. These sites, positioned at the four corners of India, symbolize the cultural unity and integrity of the nation. In contemporary times, there has been a focused movement to restore and rejuvenate these temples, driven by a cultural renaissance. Projects such as the construction of the Ram Mandir in Ayodhya, the Kashi Vishwanath corridor, and the beautification of Kedarnath are just a few examples of these efforts. These endeavors extend beyond mere religious significance. They represent a resurgence of cultural nationalism and pride among Indians. The laying of the temple's foundation stone on August 5, 2020, was not just a religious event, but a symbolic act that resonated deeply with many Hindus who have long supported the temple movement. This event was described as a cathartic moment for countless devotees, marking a significant milestone in what many see as a long-overdue reclamation of Hindu sacred spaces. Initiatives such as the Char Dham Mahamarg Vikas Pariyona aim to enhance connectivity between Gangotri, Yamunotri, Kedarnath, and Badrinath, promoting religious tourism and making these sites more accessible to devotees. The government's focus on these projects indicates a strategic effort to intertwine religious devotion with economic development through tourism, cultural festivals, and national identity. There is now a major emphasis on celebrating cultural festivals highlighting India's diverse heritage. Events like the Kashi Tamil Sangamam, Kashi Telugu Sangamam, and Saurashtra Tamil Sangamam reaffirm historical connections between different regions of India, fostering a sense of unity among its diverse populations. Such initiatives not only celebrate regional identities, but also promote national pride. Moreover, by reviving traditional arts and crafts through various programs and policies, the government aims to empower local artisans and preserve age-old skills. This approach enriches India's cultural landscape and enhances economic opportunities for communities involved in these crafts. Promotion of Hindu symbols in governance. The strategic incorporation of ancient symbols into the governance narrative is another significant achievement. For instance, installing historical artifacts like the Sengal, a scepter from Tamil Nadu, in the new parliament building symbolizes recognition of India's ancient history and cultural legacy. Such actions resonate with Hindu sentiments and reinforce the government's commitment to promoting Hindu culture as integral to Indian identity. Economic impact through cultural revival. The revival of Hindu culture has also had tangible economic benefits. The government has created employment opportunities and boosted local economies by restoring temples and promoting religious tourism. Increased tourism revenue from pilgrimage sites contributes significantly to regional development while enhancing civic pride among local populations. Moreover, initiatives to repatriate antiques reflect a commitment to safeguarding India's cultural treasures. Hundreds of priceless antique bronzes have been returned to India, reinforcing citizens' national pride and historical awareness. Balanced approach. There will, of course, be detractors who will say that the push for a Hindu-centric revival will mean the marginalization of Muslims, Christians, and other non-Hindu groups. However, secularism in the Indian context has been a double-edged sword, often stifling the expression of Hindu identity in the name of neutrality. For instance, for several decades, the Indian government provided hundreds of millions of dollars to Muslims to go on the Hajj pilgrimage. Similarly, in some southern states, the governments offer grants to Christian pilgrims traveling to Israel. Again, while mosques and churches are controlled by Muslims and Christians, plus enjoy tax-free status, Hindu temples are controlled by the state, and a portion of their income ends up in the pockets of Muslims and Christians. In fact, many state governments treat Hindu temples as cash cows. A true cultural renaissance can only happen when India discards its secular facade and recognizes the country's Hindu ethos. The goal should be to create a society where Hindus, whose sense of identity has been mutilated, feel they are no longer eighth-class citizens of India. In fact, the onus should be on Muslims and Christians to feel connected to the larger Indian identity, a society that has mollycoddled and pampered them for centuries, especially since independence. In this sense, secularism does not need to be discarded but redefined. A secular India can respect the country's Hindu heritage while allowing for the flourishing of other religious traditions, philosophies, and practices. Secularism should not mean the denial of India's cultural history, but rather the freedom for all cultures to thrive. Conclusion: Renaissance without regrets. India stands at the crossroads of history. After centuries of foreign rule and cultural erosion, it is now on the brink of a renaissance that promises to reassert its ancient identity and heritage. The government must take the lead in building institutions that promote culture, history, and knowledge. However, it is not just the government's responsibility. It is the collective responsibility of Indian society, including businesses, cultural organizations, and citizens, to support and nurture this transformation. India has the potential to become a hub of intellectual achievement, much like Europe did after the consolidation of nation-states in the 18th century. It can move from a society dominated by shallow Bollywood films to a nation where theater, classical music, and civilized public debates shape the national discourse. The world is watching, and India's cultural renaissance may well become one of the defining narratives of the 21st century. The wounded civilization may then finally heal.